So your dope-smoking hippie who wants to reach the psychedelic haven promised by Timothy Leary, or a bearded yogi with a giant erection, or imaginative youth seduced by the mythos of Merlin and ancient wizards, or a power-hungry nerd who wants special powers, or a sexually repressed, insecure person who wants to release from the mental prison, fine. The magic art just may be for you. Know thyself. No one is equal, for each of us has an universe of our own, but we are all equal in our personal sovereignty. Beware of the ego traps and pitfalls of morbidity, most of them disguised as their opposites. In the jungle, there's a certain fungus that falls from the spikes on trees onto ants crawling on the jungle floor. When the fungus is absorbed by the ants and reaches their tiny brains, they mysteriously give up all their search for food and are inclined to do nothing but climb up the trunks of trees. When they reach a certain height, they bury their heads in the trunk, where a spike grows out of them and releases a fungus again, continuing the cycle. I don't know if you will post this on your podcast, but do what thou wilt shall be the whole of law. Great show.
Thanks for your comments. Your comments were interesting and stuff to think about, but I don't really think that there's much there for me to reply. So thanks for sending that. The next one is, I think the name is Marion.
Hello, John. This is Lauren calling in from Chapel Hill, North Carolina. I really liked the interview that you did with Stephen Skinner a few episodes ago. I think it'd be great to hear more guests who are active in the ceremonial magic community, whether they're Thelemites or not. I think it's a refreshing break from the talk about OTO politics, which really only interests me in the respect that they address certain practical aspects of managing esoteric groups. Also, I've noticed there haven't been that many female guests on the show lately, and female listeners don't seem to be contributing feedback either. If I remember correctly, the last one on the show was months ago, calling in just to compliment you on your sexy voice. I know that plenty of women are listening because they're all over the Frapper map, but the issue is bigger than just Thelema coast to coast. Why do you think women are still so much less active than men are in this tradition? For instance, in the original Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn, women were very active, and they were writing a lot of the material too. It seems like in a lot of orders today, not only are women a minority, but they are almost entirely absent from leadership positions. I've seen it firsthand in esoteric groups I've been involved with, and frankly, I find it disturbing. Is there any possibility of getting a woman who's an experienced ceremonial magician to come speak on the show and give her views on this disparity? My own work has forced me to see just how much cultural conditioning I've followed growing up female in this society. The kinds of issues I'm confronted with often just aren't the same as what my male friends are dealing with in their work. So, keep the podcast coming, and please get some more women on the show.
Thanks for the voicemail, Marion. In regard to your questions are why there's so few females, it's because I don't think there actually are a lot of practicing female magicians. I can think of maybe a handful of them, but the majority of the people out there are men. And I would love for that to change. I would love to see women getting serious, but it seems to me that there is other priorities, especially many of the women that I've seen in the OTO. They don't prioritize the material. They don't prioritize the magic. They're more interested in social engagement and making friends and things like that. So I think that's one of the reasons that you don't see a lot of women on the show. And if you women out there disagree, feel free to call and leave voicemail and tell me otherwise. But yeah, I mean, I've certainly have had a handful of women on the show, even including Anarchia from Cor Lucas, and I've had a few others. But yeah, in general, I don't think there's a lot of women out there who are doing a lot of serious, meaningful, magical work. At least not that you see any of the results from. You don't see any courses, any books, any websites, any writings. You know, it's just not out there. So there are exceptions, but the exceptions kind of prove the rule. So if you women want to change that, get serious about the material and start engaging. Keith told me this story about a woman he was talking to about this, and he said, you know, we'll go out and find an instructor. And she's like, well, I've tried male instructors and it just didn't work out. And he's like, well, then go get a female instructor. And she's like, oh, they're worse. So what are you going to do? You've got to find some kind of guru, some kind of instructor, some kind of person, a teacher, even if it's only for certain aspects, you know. Go find somebody or be the teacher you want to find. That you got to do work. So anyway, I'm sure that'll piss a bunch of people off, and feel free to send feedback. Okay, the next one is a voicemail from Nathan. And Nathan is the person who called in the previous podcast and was complaining that there wasn't enough stuff about Magick. Then Keith and I spoke about that. So here's Nathan's further comments.
Hey, John. Hey, Keith 418. I guess I hit a nerve with my last mail. What I was really driving at is that, I'd be interested in hearing more things of the technical nature. Didn't necessarily mean that you guys needed to start giving instructions or step-by-steps on how to, do things that people could easily buy books to learn. No, I just meant more like discussion of the technical topics. 10,000-foot overview, as it were. One of the things that I've heard y'all mention is that there are a lot of people who haven't done the reading. And I can completely understand that, you probably get questions of that nature all the time. How do I do this particular step? I really just meant more like discuss, what is the bulk of Crowley's work? What are the calls? Talk about Enochian magic, things from a 10,000-foot point of view, and give people an idea of where to go and look up info. More like a guide. But anyway, I'm enjoying the podcast, and I'll be enjoying hearing of your stuff in the future. Have a great night. Bye.
Thanks again, Nathan, and I guess we might have misunderstood you. Today's show might actually be closer to what you're thinking, but maybe not. I don't know. So, listen to this show, and if you like it, let me know. If you don't, let me know. Either way. And the last one is a listener named Dave, who is in Texas.
Big John, 93. It's Dave Blakely down in Dallas, Texas. I just want to take a moment to thank you for the interview with Christopher Knowles last time. I'd passed by the copy of the guitar mag with the interview in it a couple of times and said, there's nothing in there that I don't already know about, so I'd walk by it. But based on the interview with him, I went ahead and picked it up, and I did really enjoy it. The sidebar with Jimmy alone was well worth the cover price. So I just want to thank you, man. Thank you for all the work that you do, and I'll talk to you soon. 93.
Thanks for the voicemail, Dave. I'm glad you liked the interview with Christopher Knowles. It was really fascinating. Chris sent me a PDF of the article before it was released, and it's some really fascinating, wonderful information. And I'm a big fan of the Lucifer Rising that Paige did. I've had it for quite a while. I used to use it as background when I was doing tarot card readings and things like that. So it's great for getting into trances. So thanks for the comment, and thanks to everybody who left voicemail. I'm not going to whine as much on this show about sending them, but please do. I really like getting the voicemails. Okay, so now we're going to move into the interviews. First one is with Keith. He and I talk about Magick as a religion, and then we kind of go into some other points. The conversation that I had with Keith kind of sprung from the conversation I had with the other guest that's on this show, an interview with Roger Williamson. Roger is an author of a number of books and recordings, a painter. He's also the owner of Magus Books in Minneapolis, and that's at magusbooks.com. Roger, he kind of shies away from looking at magic as a religious thing, and he even uses different languages. Instead of saying a ritual or ceremony, he uses machines as in kind of a mechanistic process to get people into certain mind states or certain views. So that kind of spawned the conversation that Keith and I had. So first we'll start with Keith, and we'll look at Magick and kind of the religious aspect. And then we'll go into the interview with Roger Williamson. So here's Keith.
Keith, welcome back to the podcast, 93.
93, John. Thanks for having me.
The other main guest on the show is Roger Williamson, and we talk about his personal magic system. And he makes the assertion that magic isn't religious, and he tries to get away from religious connotations and religious language. What do you think is the relationship between religion and magic?
Well, that's a question that would take a really long time to answer. You could do a whole book about that. I think Magick is interesting in that, or the question is significant in that if we look at magic and magical praxis, it both seems to affirm certain religious ideas and at the same time to call them into question, to undermine them. And there's a contradiction or a paradox in that magicians often have to operate by using the tropes and totems and trappings and ideals even within various religious systems, and yet at the same time their work tends to call into question religious faith. And magic is always sort of seen as opposed to religion in that it's a kind of an underground private religious practice that seeks to use religious tools or ideals for personal gain and benefit, kind of at the expense of religion. That's often how it's viewed, especially in Western cultures. So how does that really relate to a magician's approach to religion? There are some magicians who are very religious in conventional terms. They pray, they go to church, and they use their religious spiritual approaches in their magic. And then there seems to be other magicians who are very anti-religious and who seek to attack and undermine religious ideals. And it's almost as though their power was coming from their hostility to religion. So we see magicians on both sides of that fence, that divide, and I think that that's worth taking some time to look at.
Now, do you think that magic, or ceremonial magic in particular, is more of a tool that can be wielded by the religious or the irreligious or the anti-religious? Is it a means to get to an end, or is it some kind of metaphysical system in itself?
I guess what I would be looking at is what guides the magical praxis. When we look at Crowley's definition of magic, he tells us, is the art and science of creating change in conformity to will. So we wonder, why do we want to change certain things and leave other things alone? What changes do we want to see? What kind of profound changes do we want to make? One of the pieces that I've been working on is looking at the various vectors of how different social groups or social classes approach magic. And you can see people that are sort of poor and lower middle class or not very well educated tend to use magic to deal primarily with the day-to-day problems of their ordinary lives. You read about people doing candle burning magic to get magical partners or sex partners, and people do little spells to get a new car, and they were very sort of mundane material aid kind of practices, which people can spend their entire lives sort of enmeshed in. And then in the second tier, the more middle-class people tend to see magic as a religious issue, where they go to magical churches and attend a sort of magical religious services. And that's really their focus, is on dealing with the bureaucratic nature of those sorts of group activities that seem very close to conventional religion, or imitate them to a great extent. And then on a higher level, you see people who are very much involved with the philosophy and the sort of Gnostic ideals of magic and looking beyond just the sort of churchy experience. And those three vectors sort of work simultaneously with each other, and then sometimes seem to split off where they don't really know what the other one is doing. So all of those have certain religious dimensions to them. The kind of corporate worship, as my yoga teacher says, of the church is kind of counterbalanced with the very individual candle burning, voodoo doll making, sort of private thing that's going on in the lower vector. And then in the high vector, you have people who are sort of trying to free themselves from the bounds of these other areas, and are looking at the pure philosophical ideas and pure Gnostic ideas at the very top of the system. So it really depends on where you go and what your interests and needs are.
Do you think there's a hierarchy of development, that you go in stages through one vector to another, or are there situations where you just completely skip aspects? Like, for instance, let's say you're middle class, and so you immediately approach magic as kind of a spiritual religion, versus using it to, say, win a court case or, bring your lover back.
Well, the problem is that oftentimes the peasant sort of vector, or the pre-literate, very primitive vector, is seen as being extremely powerful. It has a palpable physicality to it. It has a very immediate experiential factor, which transfixes many middle-class people and makes them think that it's somehow more authentic than the sort of churchy approach that they would be naturally drawn to, and which they found arid over the course of their lives. So in many instances, you'll see people gravitating towards this lower sphere out of